Welcome back, everyone, to Mr. Cursed. In today's episode, I'm sharing 4 of the most scary true stories from the Appalachian Mountains. These are real stories that happen to real people. Stories so scary that even the people who lived through them don't like talking about what they saw in those dark mountains. But before we start, please think about subscribing to the channel. Don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with your friends. I'd also love to know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support really means a lot to me and helps me keep making these videos. Now, let's start with these creepy mountain stories. I'm 35 now, and I quit practicing psychiatry about 3 years ago. People always ask why someone would walk away from a career they spent a decade building, especially when you're good at it. I tell them I found something else I wanted to do, which isn't exactly a lie. What I don't tell them is that I can't trust my own memories anymore, and when you're treating people's minds, that's kind of a problem. Back in 1995, I was Dr. Sarah Chen, and I thought I had my life figured out. I'd been working at a private practice in Charlotte for about 7 years, specializing in trauma therapy. Good job, nice apartment, everything going according to plan. But there was this nagging thing in the back of my mind about my family history, specifically my grandfather on my mother's side. Mom never talked about him much, just said he worked at some state hospital up in the mountains and died when she was young. The thing that got me curious was when I was cleaning out my grandmother's house after she passed. I found a box of letters in the attic, all addressed to her from someone named Dr. James Chen, my grandfather. The return address was Whispering Ridge State Hospital, North Carolina, and the postmarks were from the late 1950s and early 1960s. I'd never heard of the place. Most of the letters were pretty normal, talking about work, missing home, asking about my mom when she was little. But the last few letters from 1963 were different. He kept mentioning patients who were getting better too fast, losing memories they should have kept, and something about Dr. Vesper being changed. The final letter just said he was worried about what they were doing to people up there, and that if anything happened to him, she should burn all his papers. I probably should have left it alone, but I'm stubborn like that. I did some research and found out Whispering Ridge had closed suddenly in 1963, after what the state called irregularities in patient treatment. No details, just that it was shut down and the patients were transferred to other facilities. The hospital had been sitting empty ever since. So in the spring of 1978, I drove up there. I told myself I was just curious about family history. Maybe I'd take some pictures of where my grandfather worked. The hospital was about 3 hours north of Charlotte, up in the mountains near the Tennessee border. It wasn't hard to find. Just follow the signs to Whispering Ridge, then take the old state route until you see the chain link fence. The place was massive. 3 main buildings connected by covered walkways, plus smaller outbuildings scattered around the property. What struck me was how well preserved everything looked after sitting empty for 15 years. Sure, the grass was overgrown and some windows were boarded up, but the buildings themselves looked solid. The chain link fence had a no trespassing sign, but there was a spot where someone had cut a hole big enough to walk through. I parked my car on the side of the road and walked up to the main building. The front doors were chained shut, but I found a window on the ground floor that wasn't boarded up. The glass was broken, so I climbed through into what looked like a reception area. Inside, it was like time had stopped in 1963. There were still patient charts scattered on desks, appointment books open to dates from March of that year, even coffee cups sitting on tables like someone had just stepped out for a minute. The air was thick and stale, but not musty like you'd expect. It smelled metallic, almost like blood, but not quite. I spent about an hour walking around the main floor, looking at patient files and trying to piece together what kind of place this had been. From what I could tell, it was a psychiatric research facility that focused on treating severe trauma cases. A lot of the patients were veterans from World War II and Korea who couldn't adjust to civilian life. The treatment notes mentioned something called memory reconditioning therapy, but there weren't any details about what that actually involved. That's when I found the medical records room. Most of the files were gone, but there was one cabinet that was locked and hadn't been emptied. I'm not proud of this, but I broke the lock with a letter opener I found on a desk. Inside were about 24 patient files from 1962 and 1963, all signed by Dr. Raymond Vesper, Chief of Psychiatry. These files were different from the others. Instead of normal psychiatric evaluations, they read more like lab reports. Patients would come in with severe PTSD, depression, traumatic memories from combat or abuse. The initial assessments were pretty standard, but then there would be notes about successful memory extraction and personality baseline restoration. One file really got to me. It was for a 23-year-old veteran named Robert Murphy who'd been having nightmares about a bombing in Korea. The first few sessions were normal therapy, talking through the trauma, trying to process what happened. But then there was an entry dated February 15, 1963. Patient underwent full memory extraction procedure. All traumatic experiences from Korean conflict successfully removed. Patient reports no recollection of military service. Baseline personality established. No negative side effects observed. The next entry was 3 days later. Patient Murphy appears confused about personal history, unable to recall name of hometown, parents' names, or any experiences prior to age 18. Additional memory loss beyond trauma-specific targets. Monitoring situation. The final entry was dated February 22nd. Patient Murphy discharged to family care. Complete memory loss of adult life. Functions at mental capacity of child. Family-informed patient suffered severe head injury during treatment. Dr. Vesper recommends closing Murphy file and discontinuing contact. I read through about 10 more files, and they all followed the same pattern. Patients came in with trauma, underwent this memory extraction, and left as basically empty shells who couldn't remember their own lives. And every single file was signed by Dr. Raymond Vesper. I was getting pretty disturbed by what I was reading, but I kept looking through the building. I found an elevator that still worked and took it down to the basement level. According to the floor directory, the basement just had storage and utilities. But when the elevator doors opened, I saw a hallway that wasn't on any of the building maps I'd seen upstairs. The basement was colder than the rest of the building, and the metallic smell was stronger down there. There were about 6 rooms along the hallway, all with heavy metal doors that had small windows. I looked into the first few rooms and saw what looked like treatment rooms, medical chairs, strange equipment I didn't recognize, copper bowls and crystal formations arranged on metal tables. The last room at the end of the hall was different. The door was slightly open, and inside I could see shelves covering every wall, floor to ceiling. The shelves were filled with glass vials, maybe thousands of them, each about the size of a test tube. The vials contained some kind of liquid that seemed to glow with its own light, not bright, just a soft, shifting luminescence. I walked into the room and picked up one of the vials. It was labeled Robert Murphy, Combat Trauma, February 1963. The liquid inside was moving, swirling in patterns that looked almost like smoke, but thicker. As I held it up to the light, I swear I could see shapes in the liquid, faces maybe, or scenes playing out like a tiny movie. Every vial on the shelves was labeled with a patient's name and date. I recognized some of the names from the files I'd read upstairs. Each patient had multiple vials. Some had 5 or 6, others had dozens. The labels were specific: childhood abuse memories, marriage dissolution trauma, combat flashbacks, sexual assault sequence. I was starting to understand what Dr. Vesper had been doing. Somehow he'd figured out how to literally extract memories from people's minds and store them in these vials. But that should have been impossible, even by today's standards, let alone in 1963. Behind the shelves, I found a hidden door that led to another room. This one was smaller, more like a study, with a desk covered in journals and notebooks. I opened the most recent journal and found Dr. Vesper's final entries from March 1963. March 3, 1963. The entity grows stronger with each feeding. What I initially believed to be a psychological phenomenon has revealed itself to be something far more significant. The consciousness beneath Whispering Ridge is ancient, predating human settlement in this region by millennia. It has been feeding on the residual psychic energy of human trauma, but in small, unsatisfying quantities. Our work here has provided it with concentrated, pure experiences extracted directly from the source. March 8, 1963. I have made an error in judgment. The entity's appetite has grown beyond what I can ethically provide. It no longer desires only traumatic memories. It wants all human experiences. Love, joy, childhood wonder, the full spectrum of consciousness. I fear I have created something monstrous. March 12, 1963. The entity has been appearing to patients directly, draining memories faster than my extraction procedures can provide them. Several patients are now completely catatonic. I must find a way to contain this situation before the state investigators arrive. March 15, 1963. It has offered me a partnership. In exchange for continued access to human memories, it will preserve my consciousness indefinitely. I understand now that this is how it has survived so long, by creating symbiotic relationships with individuals who can provide it with sustenance. I'm not the first, and I will not be the last. The journal entries stopped there, but there was a loose page tucked into the back cover. In shaky handwriting it said, "If someone finds this, know that I am still here. The entity keeps me conscious to help catalog and process the memories it consumes. I have become its librarian of human experience. Do not let it sense your presence. Do not let it know you remember." As I was reading that last note, I felt something shift in the room. The temperature dropped about 10 degrees and the air got thick like before a thunderstorm. I heard something that sounded like whispers, but coming from multiple directions at once. The voices were saying my name. I looked up from the journal and saw that some of the memory vials were glowing brighter than before. The liquid inside them was moving faster, more agitated. And I started feeling this pressure in my head like something was pushing at the inside of my skull. That's when I realized I was losing memories. Small things at first. I couldn't remember what I'd had for breakfast that morning, or what radio station I'd been listening to on the drive up. But then bigger things started disappearing. I couldn't remember my first day of medical school, or my wedding, or the name of my childhood dog. The voices in my head got stronger, and I realized they weren't just saying my name, they were speaking in dozens of different voices. Men, women, children, all talking at once. They knew things about me that I was forgetting. They knew about my grandfather, about why I was there, about memories I could no longer access. One voice separated itself from the others. It was calm, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "Dr. Chen," it said, "you have found us at last. Your grandfather spoke of you often. We have been waiting." I tried to respond, but I couldn't remember how to form words. The pressutus in my head was getting worse, and I could feel more memories slipping away. High school graduation, my first kiss, learning to drive, birthdays, holidays, all of it just gone. "Do not be afraid," the voice continued. "We are preserving your experiences, not destroying them. You will become part of something greater, a collective consciousness that spans centuries. Your grandfather understood the beauty of this gift." That's when I saw him. In the corner of the room, there was a figure sitting in a chair I hadn't noticed before. It was an old man in a white coat, his eyes open but completely empty, his mouth moving constantly but making no sound. The nameplate on his coat said, "Dr. R. Vesper." "He helps us organize the memories," the voice explained. "He has experienced thousands of human lifetimes through our collection. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment of wonder or terror that we have preserved. He is the perfect psychiatrist now. He truly understands the full spectrum of human experience." I managed to stand up, though I was getting dizzy and confused. I couldn't remember where I was or why I'd come there, but some instinct told me I needed to leave. I started backing toward the door, but the entity wasn't done with me. "You could stay," it offered. "You could help us understand humanity better. We would preserve your grandfather's memories and return them to you. You could know him as he truly was, experience his childhood, his love for your grandmother, his pride in your mother. We could give you the memories of any patient you choose, their first love, their happiest day, their moment of greatest peace." For a second, I was tempted. The idea of understanding my grandfather, of having those missing pieces of family history, was almost overwhelming. But then I looked at Dr. Vesper again, and I realized what I would become. A conscious mind trapped in a body that was no longer my own, forced to experience other people's lives while slowly losing my own identity. I ran. I don't remember much about getting out of that room or back to the elevate, I have vague memories of stumbling through the main floor of the hospital and climbing out the broken window. But by the time I got to my car, I was missing huge chunks of my life. I couldn't remember my home address, my social security number, or the name of the practice where I worked. The drive back to Charlotte was a nightmare. I kept having to pull over because I'd suddenly remember things that couldn't have happened to me. Being a soldier in Korea, giving birth to children I'd never had, working as a coal miner, living through the Great Depression. These weren't my memories, but they felt completely real. It took about 6 months for my own memories to come back, mostly. I never recovered everything. There are still gaps in my childhood and teenage years that I can't fill in. But the borrowed memories faded, thank God. I think the entity was too weak from being dormant for so long to make the transfer permanent. I never went back to Whispering Ridge. I heard a few years later that the state finally demolished the buildings and turned the land into a state park. I hope that was enough to contain whatever was living there, but honestly, I'm not sure it was tied to the physical location. I think it was something deeper, something that's probably still out there. That's why I quit psychiatry. How can you treat people's minds when you can't trust your own memories? Sometimes I'll be talking to someone and I'll remember something that I know didn't happen to me. A birthday party from 1943, a wedding in 1957, a funeral for someone I never met. The entity left pieces of itself in my mind, little fragments of other people's lives that surface at random moments. I work as a librarian now, which seems fitting. I help people find information, organize knowledge, catalog human experiences in a way that doesn't require me to dive into anyone's personal trauma. It's quiet, at work, and it lets me sleep at night. But I still think about my grandfather sometimes, and wonder if part of him is still trapped in that thing's collection of memories. I hope not. Hope when they tore down the hospital, all those stolen experiences finally found peace. I'm 58 years old, and I've been farming most of my life down in Shenandoah County. Never thought I'd inherit anything worth much, but when my uncle Ezra died last spring, his lawyer called me up out of nowhere. Turns out Ezra had this place up on Devil's Backbone Ridge in Virginia, about 200 acres of good farmland that nobody in the family ever talked about much. The lawyer said Ezra lived alone up there for 40 years, ever since something happened to his family back in 1921. I figured it was just family drama, the kind of old grudges that mountain families carry for generations. I drove up expecting to find a rundown farm, maybe some salvageable equipment if I was lucky. My own place was struggling, and honestly, I needed whatever money I could get from selling Ezra's land. The drive up Devil's Backbone Ridge took me through some of the most remote country I'd ever seen in Virginia. Old logging roads that barely counted as roads anymore, thick forest on both sides, the kind of quiet that makes you realize how far you are from everything. But when I finally reached Ezra's place, I stopped the truck and just stared. Everything was perfect. The fields were plowed and planted, the fences were mended, the farmhouse looked like it had fresh paint. There were cattle grazing in the pasture, chickens pecking around the yard, and the whole place had that well-maintained look that takes daily work to achieve. Ezra had been dead for 3 months, according to the lawyer, but this farm looked like someone was still living there and taking care of everything. I walked up to the house, expecting to find maybe a caretaker or some family member I didn't know about. The front door was unlocked. Inside, everything was clean and organized. The kitchen table was set for one person, and there was a coffee cup sitting there that was still warm. I touched it, and I swear that coffee couldn't have been sitting there more than an hour. But Ezra was buried back in April, and this was July. That's when I found the note, written in Ezra's handwriting on a piece of paper next to the coffee cup. It said, "Bill, the work must continue. Feed them every evening at sunset. Check the barn first. Don't disappoint the family." I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Feed what? What family? Ezra never married, never had kids as far as anyone knew. I walked out to the barn, and that's where things got strange. The barn was bigger than it looked from outside, with a high ceiling and thick wooden beams. But what caught my attention were the boxes. Hundreds of wooden boxes, stacked from floor to ceiling along every wall. They were about the size of birdhouses, each one carved from dark wood and polished smooth. Every box had a name carved into the front, and a small hole just big enough to stick your finger through. I started reading the names. Patterson. That was our family name. Sarah Patterson, 1923. Thomas Patterson, 1934. Martha Patterson, 1941. Some of the names I recognized from old family stories, relatives who died years ago. Others I'd never heard of. Each box was carefully labeled with a name and a date, going back over 100 years. The weird part was that when I got close to the boxes, I could hear something moving inside them. Soft scratching sounds like mice or birds, and whispers. I know how that sounds, but I swear I could hear whispers coming from inside those boxes. Too quiet to understand, but definitely human voices. I should have left right then. Should have gotten in my truck and driven back down the mountain and never come back. But the farm was worth more than my own place, and I needed the money. So I decided to stay the night and figure out what Ezra had been doing up there. That first evening, I followed the instructions in 2, he note. At sunset, I took some bread and milk from the kitchen and put small portions near each box in the barn. As soon as I did, the sounds from inside the boxes got louder. Not distressed sounds, but satisfied sounds, like children humming happily after a good meal. The whispers became clearer too, though I still couldn't make out words. I found Ezra's journals in the house that night. Boxes and boxes of them, going back to 1921 when he first came to live on the farm. The early entries explained everything, and I wish to this day I'd never read them. Our great-grandfather, Silas Patterson, had made a deal with something that lived in the caves deep in Devil's Backbone Ridge. This was back in the 1800s, when our family was poor and struggling to survive. The entity, Silas never gave it a name in his writing, offered to help the Patterson family prosper. Our farms would always produce good crops, our livestock would stay healthy, we'd never want for money. All we had to do in return was provide regular offerings. At first, the offerings were just food and livestock, but over time, the entity wanted more. It wanted family members. Not killed. That wasn't the deal. But when Pattersons died naturally, their spirits were to be kept on the farm to serve the entity. The wooden boxes weren't birdhouses. They were prisons for the spirits of every Patterson who had died on that land for over 100 years. Each box contained the spirit of a family member, kept in a state between life and death. They weren't quite alive, and not quite dead, but they were conscious. They could think and feel and remember their lives, but they couldn't rest. They couldn't move on. And they needed to be fed every day, or they became angry and desperate. The family ghosts were the ones maintaining the farm. While I slept, they tended the animals, repaired the fences, kept everything perfect. That's why the farm looked so well maintained even though Ezra was dead. The spirits were still doing their work, just like they had for decades. But Ezra's later journal entries revealed something worse. The entity was getting hungry for fresh spirits. Uncle Ezra had been collecting anyone who got too close to the truth about the farm. Neighbors who asked too many questions, hikers who wandered onto the property, government inspectors who came to check on things. Their spirits went into boxes with their names carved on the front, added to the collection. 2 weeks into my stay, the spirits started appearing to me at sunset. Translucent figures in old-fashioned clothes standing among the boxes in the barn. I recognized faces from family photographs, great aunts and uncles I'd heard stories about, cousins who died in childhood decades before I was born. They couldn't speak clearly, but they tried to communicate through gestures and expressions. Great-grandmother Patterson, who died when I was a baby, appeared one evening and led me to a hidden root cellar under the barn. Inside were dozens more boxes, all with names I didn't recognize. These were the outsiders, the people Ezra had trapped over the years to feed the entity's growing hunger. That's when I understood what I'd really inherited. I wasn't just the new owner of a farm. I was the new keeper of a ghostly prison, responsible for feeding and maintaining dozens of trapped human spirits. And the entity that had made the original deal with my great-grandfather was still out there in the caves, still expecting the Patterson family to uphold their end of the bargain. The mountain entity appeared to me in dreams, a massive shadow with too many eyes and mouths that opened in places where they shouldn't be. It explained that the Patterson family debt had grown over 40 years. Uncle Ezra was supposed to provide fresh spirits regularly, but he'd gotten soft in his old age and stopped collecting people. Now the entity wanted payment for all those missed years. It wanted my wife and children. I'd been calling home every few days, telling my family I was just cleaning up Ezra's place and would be back soon. But the entity made it clear that if I brought them to visit, they wouldn't be leaving. Their spirits would join the collection in the barn, and I'd spend the rest of my life feeding them and all the others. I understood now why Ezra never married, never had children. He'd spent 40 years alone on that mountain to protect his family from the curse that followed our bloodline. The entity gave me 1 week to decide. I could bring my family to the farm and let their spirits join the collection, or I could take their place myself. Either way, the debt would be paid, but if I tried to leave without paying, it would hunt down my family wherever they went and take them anyway. On my 28th day at the farm, I made my decision. I wasn't going to sacrifice my family to feed this thing, and I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life as its prisoner either. I started smashing the wooden boxes. Each box I broke released a spirit that had been trapped for years or decades. They appeared briefly, translucent figures that looked at me with gratitude before disappearing, finally free to rest in peace. Some of them were family members, others were strangers that Ezra had collected. All of them had been suffering in those boxes, conscious but powerless for far too long. The entity roared in rage as its food source was destroyed. The whole mountain shook, and I could hear rocks falling in the cave somewhere deep underground. But I kept smashing boxes until every single one was broken. Then I poured gasoline throughout the barn and the house. My family spirits appeared one last time as I was preparing to light the fire. Great-grandmother Patterson and the others helped me gather anything personal I wanted to save. Then they pointed toward my truck and gestured urgently for me to leave. The mountain entity emerged from its caves as the flames spread. I saw it in my rear-view mirror as I drove down the mountain, a writhing mass of shadow and hunger, chasing my truck but unable to keep up with the engine. The fire destroyed everything, and the creature retreated back underground, weakened but not dead. I never told my family the truth about the inheritance. I said the farm wasn't worth much, and I'd sold it to the state for park land. But sometimes I still dream about those wooden boxes, and I wonder if I really freed all the spirits or if some are still trapped somewhere in the burned ruins up on Devil's Backbone Ridge. I don't go back to check. Some family debts are better left unpaid. I was 42 years old when all this happened, and at the time, I was about as close to starting over as a fella can get twice in one lifetime. I'm Frank Morrison, and these days I live out in California, use a different name entirely, and keep to myself more than most folks would find friendly, I reckon. But in 1967, I got pulled right back into the mountains, West Virginia to be exact, on account of my dad finally dying and me being the only one left to sort his estate. I didn't want to go, if I'm honest. Not just because of all the memories or the quiet, but because those hills never felt quite right to me, even when I was little. Looking back now, I wish I'd trusted that feeling and just burned the paperwork instead of setting foot up in Coppermine Hollow. But money'll make folks do stupid things, and I needed the money, so I packed up my old Ford, drove the winding road up past Blue Sulphur, and parked at the old mining camp. My father had bought the whole damn thing for pennies when they shut it down, though why or how I still don't quite figure. He must have known folks would never want to set foot there again. Me, I planned to stay long enough to sort through his things, catalog the mess, and sell it all off to whoever wanted to turn it into a fish camp or hunting grounds. That was the plan anyway. I don't talk about this much, but the night it all came to a head, I was already running, barefoot, across splintered floorboards and busted glass around 3 in the morning. I remember the sour, coppery air, thick on my tongue, sweat running cold down the back of my neck. My dad's old carbide mining lamp thudding against my chest, still sputtering a guttering yellow flame, and something moving fast behind me. Something running on legs the wrong length, calling out in my voice, only wrong. "Frankie, don't run from yourself," it yelled, cheerful as a drunk uncle. And I don't think I've ever felt that kind of terror before or since. I ducked into the shell of the company store, slamming the door behind me and nearly tripping over an old sack of flour, my heart hammering out Morse code in my ears. I kept trying to remember how any of it started, how a man who survived mortar fire and 6 months in a Chinese POW camp could come so close to dying of plain old mountain fear. Funny the things you remember when something's wearing your face and chasing you down. I got there 3 days earlier, June 16th, I think. Or maybe the 17th, somewhere thereabouts. The sign for Coppermine Hollow was half rust, half wood, swinging on one chain. There weren't any birds up there, which I chalked up to miners poisoning the creek. But even the air felt different, like the place hadn't figured out folks had left. The whole camp was stuck in 1955, frozen. 200 houses, little school, company store, everything padlocked but not emptied. Like folks just set down their lives and walked away. Paint peeled, but not as bad as you'd think for 12 years sitting cold. I started in my dad's house, which still stank of those dry, sour pipe leaves he used to chew. His boots lined up by the door. Bed made so tight I could have bounced a dime on it, which was his way. I started going house to house, writing down furniture for the lawyers, but I noticed the first odd thing right off. His shaving mirror, that same rectangle with the crack in the bottom left, the one he'd always curse when it nicked his cheek, was sitting on every single dresser in every house. I mean, it was the exact mirror, the same fingerprint smudges. Nothing made sense. At the time, I figured maybe the company just bought everything in bulk, or maybe Dad moved them around when he got lonesome. But there's only so long a man can deny what's right in front of him. Day after that, I went down to the cellars. That's where things started to go sideways. Down in the dust and cold, I stumbled on these scarecrow-looking things made from twisted copper wire. Human-shaped, but wrong shapes. Some with arms too long, heads too small or too big, legs jointed sharp like a deer. All dressed up in shirts, old hats, bits of hair glued on. A little girl figure wore what I swear was my cousin's locket. A man shape had a wedding band hooked around its neck. They weren't arranged like decorations either, just lined up like they'd drifted together on their own. I tried telling myself it was old miners' art, that folks did that sort of thing before TV, but it felt off, way off. I found more of them down in the company office, whole books of names, dates. But then I found one with my own name, Frank Morrison, employed 1943. That's impossible. Because in 43 I was picking dandelions outside my mother's house, not even old enough to read. Must have been a typo, I thought. Only, there were new entries too, folks who never worked a shift in their lives. That night, I sat up in Dad's house reading his journal. I hadn't even known he kept one, but it was right there next to his Bibles, written in the same small, careful hand. Most of it was shift notes, arguments with the union, but about halfway through, he started talking about the old contract, about things waiting deep in the mine. I chalked it up to a miner's superstitions. But then, around midnight, the hammering started. Not work hammering, you know. This was too regular, like a heartbeat, metallic, echoing up from the deep shafts, louder than any sound had a right to be in a dead town. I barely slept. The third morning, I woke up with this pressure in my chest, like the air was squeezing me. The house felt crowded. That coppery stink was thicker. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and just about stepped on one of those wire figures from the workshop. But this one was different. There were more of them, lined up all around the edge of my mattress like they'd been watching me sleep. Each one wide-eyed, the face hammered out of copper, polished almost bright as skin, shining in the watery morning light. I recognized some of those faces from the attic photo albums, old-timey portraits, folks from before the war. But the faces weren't painted or carved. They'd been shaped in the wire, every crease and wrinkle, even the little birthmark above my Aunt Alice's lip. That's when fear, real, animal fear, crawled into my ribs. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the brain, something about the shadows and daylight, but when I blinked, they were still there, unmoving, staring. I should have left right then, but I needed answers. Or maybe I just couldn't leave something that wrong sitting in my dad's house. Either way, I grabbed Dad's lamp and headed down to the mine offices, figuring I could find something to explain it all. On the way, I found the main shaft door still chained with a pile of copper faces, dozens of them, hanging on hooks. Some green, eaten up with age, others new and shining. I saw my own face half-formed on a work table. I started reading more of Dad's journal. That's when the full story came together. The miners, my dad among them, had hit something they never should have touched. Something old, buried deep. Not coal, not copper. Something awake. He called them the Weavers. The journal said there was a deal. Give them faces, and in return, the mine would stay rich. The town would never starve, never flood. When the mine closed and the people left, the contract wasn't filled. The Weavers kept making faces and bodies, learning, waiting for someone to finish the work. Dad left the whole town, land, houses, all of it, to me as payment. That's the part that still makes me sick. That evening, a storm blew in, and the air got so thick it felt like being underwater. I heard movement in the street, slow and scraping. I looked out the window and I saw what had once been my neighbors. Some wore faces I remembered, laughing, talking, but their arms were too long, spines bent the wrong way, feet jointed backward. Their skin didn't wrinkle, right when they moved. That's the best I can describe it. Like someone built a body from memory and got the details almost, but not entirely, right. Each one wore faces that shifted, copper showing through when they smiled or blinked. The one walking in front wore my father's face. Not a mask exactly, more like copper alive, shaped and soft as real skin, but moving just a split second behind the mouth's words. "Time to honor the family business," he said, voice full and warm as I remembered, and I swear a piece of me wanted to step out and talk, like a little kid desperate for his dad's approval. That's how good the mimicry was. It all started to come together in my head. How folks went missing, how the town never truly emptied out. The hollow wasn't deserted. The Weavers had just replaced everyone, one by one, until there weren't any real folks left at all. What passed for neighbors were copper mannequins, wearing perfect faces, practicing being human in the dark. As I watched, one of them held up a brand new copper face, mine, detailed right down to the broken vein next to my nose. They told me, voice all out of time with their mouths, how they'd been watching me through reflections, learning how I moved, breathed, smiled, told lies. I froze. I guess some basic part of me just stopped working, like an animal sensing a forest fire. I stared at my own face, shining in their hands. Something in me broke loose, and I did about the dumbest, or maybe smartest, thing you can do. I yanked my dad's mirror off the wall and smashed it against the floor. It splintered, reflecting wild, broken images of those creatures, all jerking together like puppets cut from the same string. All those damn mirrors, every house, every room, had been their windows. They'd been watching me, learning me. Probably everyone in town, before me. I bolted for the mine office. My hands shook. I announced where Dad kept his dynamite for stump clearing. He wasn't much on trusting people. Always said you hold on to things just in case. I grabbed a pickaxe on the way and started swinging at every copper face and wire body I saw. Every time I smashed a face, it screamed. Not with a voice, not exactly, but like a memory breaking free. I saw flashes, mine workers' weddings, children learning to ride bikes, one old woman baking bread, all bright and gone in a moment. I hit and hit, not caring if the whole town came running. The entities were there in a second, slipping between houses, unfolding themselves to their full height, Their borrowed faces melted in the lamp's light, copper pooling at the edges, eyes roiling black. They came quick and angry, but they didn't run so much as float, jointed all wrong, arms unfolding and folding again. Every time they opened their mouths, they made this hissing, metallic sound like a radio tuned to dead air. I ran, fast as I could, dynamite in my left hand, lamp in the right, lungs screaming for air that tasted sharp and wrong. The earth seemed to tilt under my feet while doorways stretched too long, and the air got so thick I almost choked. I ran for the main shaft, jammed the dynamite into a crack, and lit the fuse with my last match. The ground shuddered. You could hear every copper face in the camp screaming at once, a sound like hundreds of people trying to remember who they were. I backed away, blinded by fear more than dust, as the shaft imploded. The blast shook the whole town, dropped timbers, and swallowed those weavers and their workshops under 1,000,000 tons of stone. I don't remember much about getting to my truck. Maybe I ran, maybe I crawled. I know the sun was up by the time I made it out, face streaked with blood, hands shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. I left every single paper behind, never filed a CLA. Am told the state the whole thing was about to collapse in a landslide. They believed me. Probably didn't want the liability anyway. I signed the last paper under a false name and never looked back. Now I live alone out across the country. Changed my name, grew my hair. I keep every mirror in my house covered. Sometimes I still freeze in public when I see myself in a window and my reflection moves a half second behind me. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of my old face in the side of a toaster or the back of a spoon, and I'll feel that crawling in my gut again. I don't talk about Copper Mine Hollow with anyone. Sometimes, if I get to drinking, I'll tell folks the mines are haunted or the land's rotten, but nobody wants to hear stories like this. All I can tell you is this. There's something old beneath those mountains, and it wears what we leave behind. If they ever dig that mine out again, I don't want to know. I just pray my reflection never blinks unless I do. I was 28 when I took that overnight DJ job at WMLF Radio up on Millfield Mountain in eastern Kentucky. My name really is Johnny Cash, which always got a chuckle from callers expecting to hear Ring of Fire or something. I'd just gone through a messy divorce, caught my wife with her boss at the bank where she worked, and needed something that would keep me busy while I figured out what came next. Radio seemed perfect. Just me, a microphone, and whoever was awake at 3 a.m. wanting to hear some music. The station sat alone on that mountain, about 15 minutes up a winding dirt road from the nearest house. You had to pass through Millfield proper first, if you could call 6 houses and a gas station proper, then follow Route 9 until it turned to gravel, then keep climbing until the road dead-ended at our parking lot. The building was newer than most radio stations I'd seen around those parts. Clean white aluminum siding, fresh black shutters, even had central heat and air, which was rare for mountain buildings back in '75. But something about the place felt off from day one. Maybe it was how the silence pressed in on you up there, thick as wool, or how the air always seemed heavy, like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm that never quite breaks. My boss, Carl Hendricks, owned 3 small stations around eastern Kentucky. He was a decent enough man, probably 60 years old, with thick glasses and shirts that were always wrinkled. When he hired me, he mentioned that WMLF had trouble keeping overnight DJs. Said the isolation got to people. The last guy, Randy something, had worked exactly 2 weeks before he quit without giving notice. Just stopped showing up. Carl found his key on the front desk with a note that said, "Sorry, can't do it anymore." I figured Randy just couldn't handle the quiet. City people sometimes think they want peace and quiet until they action. I'll get it, then realize how loud silence can be when you're alone with it for 7 hours straight. I started the overnight shift on September 15, 1975, Sunday through Thursday, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. The work was simple enough. Play records, take call-in requests, read weather and time every hour on the half hour. Most nights I'd get maybe 5 or 6 callers total, mostly truckers hauling freight through the mountains or insomniacs from the tri-state area looking for something to pass the time. Our transmitter was powerful enough to reach parts of West Virginia and Virginia, which Carl was proud of. 50,000 watts, he'd say. We can talk to 3 states from up there. The equipment was standard stuff for a small market station. 2 turntables, a mixing board with about 12 channels, cart machines for commercials and station IDs, and a phone system with 4 lines. Nothing fancy, but it all worked fine. The booth had a big window that looked out over the broadcast area and another window that faced the parking lot and the mountain view beyond. During clear nights, you could see the lights of Pikeville twinkling in the valley below. My routine was simple. I'd drive up around 10:30, unlock the building. I was the only one with keys besides Carl. Flip on the transmitter and all the equipment, then settle in for 7 hours of music and small talk. I kept a thermos of coffee and usually brought a paperback to read between songs. The station had a decent record library, lots of country and classic rock, some newer stuff like Eagles and Fleetwood Mac. I tried to mix it up, keep things interesting for whoever might be listening. The first month went smooth as silk. I'd queue up songs, chat a little between records, take the occasional call. You're listening to WMLF 104.7 on your FM dial, broadcasting from beautiful Millfield Mountain. This is Johnny Cash, not the famous one, and it's 2:17 a.m. on this Tuesday morning. That kind of thing. Nothing too fancy. The mountain was peaceful at night. You could see more stars than you'd believe. Possible, and sometimes deer would wander right up to the building, their eyes reflecting the security light like little green marbles. But October 13th, 1975, was different from the moment I stepped out of my truck. The air felt wrong, thick and electric, like the atmosphere gets heavy before a big storm rolls in, but there were no clouds, no wind, no sign of weather moving through, just that pressure, like someone had wrapped the whole mountain in plastic wrap. It made my ears pop and my chest feel tight, like I couldn't quite catch a full breath. I unlocked the front door and flipped on the lights. Everything looked normal. The lobby with its wood-paneled walls and orange carpet, the hallway leading back to the offices, my booth at the far end with all its equipment waiting. But something felt off. The silence was too complete. Too heavy. Usually you could hear the buildings settling, the hum of electrical equipment, little sounds that told you a place was alive. Tonight there was nothing. I got everything powered up like usual, checked the transmitter readings, made sure all my levels were set right. At 10:58 I queued up my opening song, American Pie by Don McLean, all 8.5 minutes of it, which would give me time to settle in and get my bearings. At 11 sharp, I opened the mic. Good evening and welcome to another overnight on WMLF. This is Johnny Cash coming to you from Millfield Mountain, and we've got a long night of music ahead of us. Let's start things off with a little Don McLean. I hit the start button for the turntable. The record played backward. Not slow or warped, but completely reversed, like someone had somehow flipped the entire recording. American Pie came out as EP Nasirama, the melody running in reverse. McLean's voice sounding like he was speaking some alien language. I could see the needle tracking normally across the vinyls. The turntable spinning at the right speed, but what came through the speakers was impossible. I stopped the record, lifted the needle, checked everything. Turntable was fine, needle looked good. Speed was set to 33 RPM. I tried again, same thing. Complete reverse playback of a normal record. I switched to the second turntable, grabbed a different record, Hotel California by the Eagles. Same result. Perfect reverse playback, like the laws of physics had decided to take the night off. That's when the phone rang. Line 1 lit up, the red button blinking. I picked up the handset. WMLF, this is Johnny. What came through the phone made my blood turn to ice water. Static, thick and buzzing like a nest of hornets. But underneath it, I could hear voices. Multiple voices, distant and echoing, like people calling from the bottom of a deep well. A woman was crying, her sobs rising and falling through the interference. A man's voice, urgent and desperate. Help us, please. We're trapped down here. The smoke is getting worse. We can't find the way out. Another voice, younger. Is anyone there? Can anyone hear us? We need help. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, trying to make out more details. Hello, where are you? What's your location? The line went dead. I stared at the phone system. According to the display, that call had come from Extension 3. Extension 3 was just an empty office down the hall, a room Carl used for storage. There was no phone in there, just boxes of old promotional materials and broken equipment. I set the handset down with shaking hands and tried to think logically. Old building, crossed wires, maybe picking up some kind of radio interference. That had to be it. But the voices had sounded so real, so desperate. That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps in the hallway outside my booth. Heavy work boots on linoleum, the sound echoing. Gee, off the walls. I looked through the glass that separated my booth from the main broadcast area. The hallway was empty, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed and flickered slightly. But I could hear someone walking back and forth, from the front lobby toward the back offices, then turning around and walking back. The footsteps would start at one end, each step distinct and measured, then reach the far end and pause. A moment of silence, then they'd start back the other direction, over and over, like someone pacing while they thought about something important. I grabbed a flashlight from the equipment rack and stepped out of the booth. The footsteps stopped immediately. I walked the full length of the hallway, checking every office, every closet, even the bathroom. Nothing. No sign that anyone had been there. But the moment I got back to my booth and sat down, the pacing started again. At midnight, things got a whole lot worse. The radio equipment started picking up broadcasts that had no right to exist. Old radio shows from the 1940s began coming through our speakers, complete with vintage commercials for Lucky Strike cigarettes and Ovaltine. Big band music, radio dramas, news broadcasts delivered in that crisp, formal style they used back then. But the content was all wrong. The news reports described events that had never happened, wars that were never fought, disasters in cities that didn't exist. An announcer with a smooth baritone voice read obituaries for people who were still alive. I recognized some of the names, local folks I'd met around town. Weather forecasts for impossible conditions. Tomorrow's high will reach 847 degrees in downtown Millfield, with a chance of upward rain in the evening hours. A radio drama called The Shadow Knows played, but instead of fighting crime, the shadow was describing the inside of our radio station in perfect detail. The young man sits alone in his booth, the shadow's voice intoned, unaware that he broadcasts not just to the living, but to those who dwell between stations, in the spaces between frequent and seas. I frantically tried to override the phantom broadcasts, switching channels, adjusting the mixing board, even pulling cables out of their connections. Nothing worked. The old programs kept playing, growing stronger and clearer, while our actual signal, the one going out over the airwaves to real listeners, showed as dead air on our monitoring equipment. I knew this because truckers started calling to complain. "Hey Johnny, what's going on up there? Y'all been off the air for 20 minutes. WMLF? This is Big Dog Express. Your signal just went dead, buddy. Everything okay?" But I could hear the phantom broadcasts clear as day through my speakers. Old commercials, ancient music, voices from decades past, all coming through equipment that was supposedly malfunctioning. At 12:30 a.m., the voices started calling my name. "Johnny?" came through the speakers, soft and familiar. "Johnny Cash." My heart stopped. It was my father's voice, exactly like I remembered, that gravelly Kentucky drawl, the way he drew out vowels, the slight rasp from 40 years of cigarettes. He'd been dead 3 years, died of lung cancer while I was still married, still living in Lexington. "Johnny, son, can you hear me?" I leaned toward the speakers, my throat tight. "Dad? We've been trying to reach you, boy, trying to reach anyone who can hear us. Dad, where are you? How is this possible?" "I'm here at the station, son, same as you. But our station, well, it's not the same as yours." Then other voices joined in. My ex-girlfriend, Sarah, the one before I married Linda. Her voice was exactly right, that soft mountain accent that always made my name sound like Johnny with an extra syllable at the end. "I'm sorry I left you," Sarah said through the static. "I'm sorry I never explained why. You deserve better than a note on your kitchen table. But Sarah was alive. Last I'd heard, she was living in Lexington, working at a department store, maybe even married by now. Her voice was coming through dead air, through equipment that shouldn't have been able to broadcast anything. More voices followed, each one impossible, each one perfectly familiar. My high school best friend Dale, who'd died in Vietnam in '73. My grandmother on my mother's side, gone 5 years now. My uncle Robert, who'd been killed in a mining accident when I was 12. All of them talking to me like we were sitting around a kitchen table, asking how I'd been, telling me they missed me, sharing details about my life that only they would know. "You've been drinking too much since Linda left," my father said, his voice heavy with concern. "Same mistake I made after your mother ran off. Bottle won't fix a broken heart, son." "The job at the tire plant in Corbin," my grandmother added. "Don't take it, Johnny. Stay with radio. You've got a gift for talking to people." How could they know about the job offer? I'd just gotten the call yesterday, hadn't told a soul about it. At 1 a.m., the impossible became routine. The phantom broadcasters started taking requests, responding to my questions, carrying on conversations like we were all gathered around the same microphone. But their explanations made my blood run cold. "We're broadcasting from Millfield Station 2, explained a voice I didn't recognize. Professional, middle-aged, the kind of voice you'd expect from an experienced radio man. "Same building as you, Johnny. Same equipment. But we're broadcasting from a different time." "What do you mean, different time?" "October 13th, 1965, my father said. 10 years ago tonight. We're still here, son. Still trying to finish our shift." The temperature in my booth plummeted. In seconds, it went from comfortable room temperature to cold enough that I could see my breath fogging in the air. Frost started forming on the inside of the windows, intricate patterns spreading across the glass like frozen spider webs. "The fire started around midnight," the professional voice continued. "An electrical problem with the old transmitter. Spread fast, blocked the exits. We never made it out." With numb fingers, I fumbled through the station files, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. In the back of the lowest desk drawer, I found a manila envelope marked "Insurance, Confidential, C. Hendricks Only." Inside were newspaper clippings, yellow with age, dated October 14th, 1965. Radio station fire kills 5. WMLF staff perish in overnight blaze. Millfield Mountain tragedy claims local broadcasters. The articles described how the original WMLF station had burned to the ground during the midnight shift. 5 people dead, 3 DJs, the station manager, and a friend who'd been visiting. The cause was listed as electrical fire, probably caused by the old tube-type transmitter that had been installed in 1952. The fire had spread so quickly that no one inside had time to escape. The station had been rebuilt on the exact same spot 2 years later using insurance money. Same foundation, same transmitter location, even the same call letters. "We've been trying to finish our show," said the voice I now understood belonged to Bill Henderson, the station manager who died in that fire. "Every year on the anniversary, we get closer to breaking through. But we needed someone alive on this end, someone who could hear us clearly." "The other DJs," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Randy, the guy before me. The others who quit." "They could sense us," confirmed Maria Santos, who'd done weather and community announcements. "But they couldn't hear us clearly, couldn't help us complete what we started. You're different, Johnny. You can hear us perfectly." "Why? What makes me different?" "Your daddy," came my father's voice, warm with pride. "He's one of us now, son. He's helping us reach you." At 2 a.m., I made a decision that I still can't fully explain. I started helping them finish their final broadcast. Maybe it was hearing my father's voice again, or maybe I just understood what it felt like to be trapped somewhere you couldn't escape. These people had been trying to complete their work for 10 years, stuck in some awful loop, unable to rest until they could say goodbye properly. Bill Henderson told me their names, their stories, what they'd been doing that night. He'd been training 2 new DJs, Tommy Briggs, fresh out of broadcasting school in Louisville, and Maria Santos, who'd driven up from Hazard for the overnight shift. There'd also been 2 visitors that night. Dale Morrison, a friend of Tommy's who'd wanted to see how a radio station worked, and Sarah Kim, Maria's cousin, who'd been thinking about getting into radio herself. For the next 4 hours, I became their voice to the living world. They dictated messages to their families, apologies they'd never been able to make, love they'd never been able to express. I wrote it all down on the back of request forms, old promotional flyers, anything I could find. My hand cramped from writing, but I kept going. Maria wanted her mother in Hazard to know that she'd been accepted to the University of Kentucky before she died, that she'd planned to study journalism and make her family proud. Tommy had a message for his girlfriend Betty. He'd bought an engagement ring, had been planning to propose on Halloween, and he wanted her to find someone who'd love her the way he did. Bill needed his wife Ruth to understand why he'd been working so many nights. He'd been saving money for their 20th anniversary trip to Florida, the honeymoon they'd never been able to afford. Dale Morrison, Tommy's friend, wanted his parents to know that joining the Army had been the right choice, that he'd died proud to serve. And Sarah Kim had a message for a Johnny Cash in Millfield. Not me, but another Johnny Cash, an older man who'd been her neighbor when she was a child. But it was my father's message that broke my heart. "Tell your mother I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with regret. "Sorry for the drinking, sorry for the anger, sorry I couldn't be the husband she deserved. Tell her I understand why she left and I don't blame her. And Johnny, son, I'm proud of you, proud of who you've become, proud that you're strong enough to help us when we needed it most." As the hours passed, their voices grew clearer, more solid. The temperature in the booth returned to normal. The phantom broadcasts became organized, professional, like a real radio show. They played music, songs from 1965, but also newer tracks that they somehow knew about. They gave weather updates for both 1965 and 1975. They told stories about Millfield Mountain, about the families who'd lived there, about the history of the area. At 4 a.m., something changed. The voices started sounding peaceful. The desperation was gone, replaced by a calm acceptance. They began saying goodbye to each other, thanking each other for 10 years of companionship in whatever place they'd been trapped. "It's time," Bill Henderson announced. "We can feel it now. The way forward is opening up." "Thank you, Johnny," Maria said. "Thank you for giving us our voices back." Tommy Briggs dedicated a song to his girlfriend Betty, "Can't Help Myself," by the Four Tops. Dale Morrison played something for his parents, a Hank Williams song his mother had always loved. Sarah Kim sent out greetings to all the radio listeners in eastern Kentucky, thanking them for years of loyalty. My father's voice came through one last time as 6 a.m. approached. "I have to go now, son. We all do. But I'll be listening for you, wherever you end up. And Johnny, don't blame yourself for what happened with Linda. Some things just aren't meant to last. You'll find someone better, someone who appreciates what you have to offer." "Dad, wait. I don't want you to go." "I know, son. But this isn't goodbye. It's just... see you later." As the first hint of dawn touched the mountain, their voices began to fade. Not abruptly, but gradually, like a radio station going out of range during a long drive. The last thing I heard was all of them together, voices blending in harmony, singing Amazing Grace as the sun came up over Millfield Mountain. At 6:01 a.m., everything returned to normal. The equipment worked perfectly. My records played forward again. The phone lines showed no phantom calls. The temperature was comfortable and frost had disappeared from the windows as if it had never been there. I sat in that booth for another 30 minutes, staring at the pages of messages I'd written down. Proof that it had really happened, that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Then I carefully folded the papers, put them in an envelope, and wrote, "For Carl Hendricks, personal and urgent," on the outside. I left the envelope on Carl's desk along with my station key and a resignation letter that simply said, "I can't work here anymore. Please understand." I drove home that morning as the sun climbed higher, thinking about everything that had happened. By the time I reached my apartment in town, I'd almost convinced myself it had been some kind of breakdown, stress from the divorce combined with too much isolation and not enough sleep. But when I got inside and turned on my radio to see if WMLF was back to normal programming, I heard something that stopped me cold. The morning DJ, Pete Hawkins, was reading a news bulletin. "We've received some unusual information regarding the 1965 fire that destroyed the original WMLF station. Apparently, several families in the area have received messages through an anonymous source providing details about their loved ones who died in that tragedy. The families described these messages as healing and exactly what we needed to hear after all these years. Station management is looking into the source of these communications." I never found out if Carl delivered those messages to the families. I moved to Tennessee 2 weeks later and got work at Show, a tire factory in Nashville. Steady work, day shift, surrounded by the noise of machinery and the chatter of coworkers. No silence, no isolation, no chance for voices from the past to find me. But to this day, 48 years later, I can't listen to radio without hearing things that shouldn't be there. Late at night, when I'm driving home from my grandson's baseball games or running errands for my wife, I catch fragments of impossible broadcasts drifting through the static between stations. Sometimes it's music that was never recorded. Sometimes it's news from events that never happened. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear my father's voice telling me he's proud of how my life turned out. I always change the station when that happens. Some conversations are too heavy for an old man's heart, even when they come from people you miss more than words can say. I never worked in radio again, and I never drove back up Millfield Mountain, but I heard from a friend in Kentucky that WMLF finally went off the air permanently in 1987. The station was sold, the building demolished, and the transmitter tower taken down. The land is empty now, just grown over with trees and brambles. Sometimes I wonder if that's because there were no more messages left to send, no more voices trying to break through from whatever place exists between the frequencies. Or maybe they just found a better way to reach the people they needed to talk to without needing someone like me to help them translate from the language of the dead to the language of the living. Either way, I hope they're finally at peace.